Yeah, this is in the footsteps of the Inca, and I'm not sure that's the best ever title, but since I did hike the Inca Trail, indeed, I guess I was in the footsteps of the Inca. And I'm assuming quite a few of you, certainly many of you have been to Machu Picchu, and I'm assuming also many of you have hiked the Inca Trail, and there's lots of Inca trails, but the one here is a 4-day backpack into Machu Picchu with 3 nights out. Anyway, that's what I did about a year ago, and I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm going to just talk right now about the Inca civilization, the Inca Empire. But at the end of the talk, I will talk about the hike. Now, we have to break roughly at 8 o'clock, so people that have heard enough can leave. But that's when then I'll talk about the Inca Trail, and then maybe we'll have questions. And I'm willing to stay longer and then go get a glass of chicha. So I'm going to start kind of in a strange way. Again, my background is not anthropology, it's not archaeology, it's not history. And so this is probably back to high school or something, and you're saying, what does this have to do with the Inca? Well, this is what I learned in a history class about the Southwest, that there were these conquistadors that came up out of Mexico, and they were running around the Southwest, and they were looking for 7 cities of gold. They would have been happy to find 1 city of gold. But this is Coronado when he shows up at a Zuni Pueblo in Arizona. But I always thought, how gullible can somebody be? Who sold them this thing that you would find cities of gold wandering around? And I just, for a long time, just didn't believe it, and I thought, it was some type of a scam. But then once I finally grew up and matured and learned about the Incas and the Aztecs, then this made more sense. And hopefully it already has made sense to you all, or at least by the end of the talk it will. This is a map of South America, and so this is a little bit of geography. South America has the Andes Mountain running all the way top to bottom. That's the longest mountain range in the world. It's the second highest, second only to the Himalayas, with lots of peaks over 20,000 feet. The west of that is this area here, where from the Pacific Ocean, very rapidly, the elevation goes up to about 10,000 feet. And you can't read the labels on here, but this brown is 10,000 feet and above. So it's a very, very high plateau then pushing up against the Andes. It's in the rain shadow, or I'm sorry, just go over that, and then you have the Amazon going out to the Atlantic, but it's in the rain shadow of the Andes, and it gets very little rainfall. It's a very, very dry, arid place. Let me see here. The Acoma Desert down in there is the driest place in the world, receiving something like 0.01 inches of rain per year. Some years it doesn't rain at all. So it's very, very dry. But there's a lot of snow and rain that falls in the Andes. So there's water going off into the Amazon basin, and there's water going west into the Pacific. And that water runs down rivers, runs down valleys or canyons. So the point is, there's quite a bit of water going out, but the land itself is very dry. So that's what we're dealing with. I'm not doing something. Okay, and I'm showing you on here where Cusco is. Cusco, the word I think means navel, and that's the center of the Inca Empire. And then just south of that, I don't know if you see that little lake there, that's Lake Titicaca, the highest lake, 12,000 feet, the highest navigable lake in the world. And we'll be talking about some of those. Now I also, pushing the wrong button, I freehand drew on here this red line. This is my interpretation of where the Ring of Fire is, this tectonic line you can draw around the Pacific Basin. It's tectonic, it's very, very active, so there's a lot of volcanoes and earthquakes, again, along that line. So now here's another representation, but now showing all the way up through Central America, up into Mexico. And here I show the Maya civilization. I just want to run through very quickly these 3 other civilizations and empires. The Maya were from 250, and I'm going to use Common Era CE and BCE rather than AD and BC, but they're one and the same. So the Maya were for 250 BCE to 900. So that's about 1,150 years. That's quite a while. But if you compare that to other civilizations, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, Romans, that's kind of typically a pretty good run. And now I put on here the Aztecs, which are kind of centered around present-day Mexico City. The Aztecs were from 1400 to 1521. So that's only 120 years or so. That's not very long. And then finally the Inca down here, you can see how much, I'm sorry. Mitch said the problem with this is they put all 4 buttons right together, so it's a little bit hard for me to drive this. So the Inca, you can see where the Inca Empire is. It's very, very large compared to the others, but it runs from about 1438 to 1531, so less than 100 years, which is quite surprising. Now, the Inca didn't call their civilization or their empire, even their land, Inca. Inca was the term for the leader, the king, the Super Inca, the head of the whole group. But when the Spanish came, and there's the spoiler for this, the Spanish are coming, they were confused about all this, so they just applied the word Inca to everyone, to all the people, the royal family, and the Super Inca. But the Incas really called themselves Tawantinsuyu, which means 4 quadrants or 4 districts. And that's kind of what they looked out, kind of the cardinal directions, and there were 4 quadrants that came out from Cusco. Now it's kind of interesting, 1521, 1531, those 2 that are completely disconnected. There's no connection between the Aztecs and the Incas, and yet within 10 years of each other, they both went belly up. And again, that's the spoiler. That's the Spanish, the so-called contact time when the Spanish arrived, and we'll talk about that. Now, just for comparison, I put Mesa Verde on here. I don't know if we have someone from Mesa Verde, but I put down 600 to 1300. So that's about 700 years, still quite a bit longer than either of these empires. And I also put Durango on here, founded in 1881. So presently, Durango has outlasted the Aztec and the Inca Empire. We're doing very well. So now I'm going to give you the hybrid origins of the Inca. There's 4 different mythological origins. And I'm not going to give you 4. I'm not even going to give you 1. This is what I call a hybrid. I'm just going to pull some things out from those. One is, so you're introduced to Viracocha, and this is the creation god. So this is the god that made the land and the sea and the sky and the Milky Way, the sun, and all of that. Again, I'm just picking up little things that we're going to use later on. And what he drew up these 2 young people, Manco Capac and Mama Okyo, out of Lake Titicaca. And they were children of, you understand this is mythology, this isn't yet real. But they are the children of Inti. Inti is the sun god. And now, being a solar physicist, I can tell you why he's there. The sun goes across the sky every day. If you go down to the Pacific, you'll see it set. It goes into the ocean. It goes underwater all night. And clearly, it's in Lake Titicaca, so that's how he could have 2 children there. Then it comes up in the east and around. That's all my mythology. But anyway, so they're the children, and they're given a golden staff. They're told to wander around until they can push this staff into the ground. And that will indicate that the soil is good enough, and that's where they ought to settle, and they ought to build a temple to Inti. So I'm giving you this, and I'm going to give you one other fact that's disconnected to these, but it may come up later. Another part of this is that Viracocha, down around Lake Titicaca, could pick up stones, and he had a way of making them soft and pliable like clay, and he could form people out of them. So the point of that isn't that he could form people, but that somehow he could make stones soft and pliable, and I may bring that up later in the talk. Well, here's this is an alternate origin for them. This has to do with migrations, immigration from Asia. So if humans evolve out of Africa, out of Asia, they're hunter-gatherers. 40,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. The entire polar cap was frozen. The ocean, the Arctic was frozen. So you could walk across there if you were a hunter-gatherer, but you'd be thousands of miles of crevasses and snow, and nobody did that. But long about 12,000 to 10,000, finally this snow, it started to melt, and now you have a passage. Now people from Asia can immigrate down into North America, down through Central America, down into South America. And I'm not going to talk about this. This would be an interesting thing for a lifelong learning discussion some night. But the point is that's more likely than Viracocha and Inti and all of that. This is more likely how we get folks down there. Well, okay, so this is, I don't want to say it's controversial, but there's some things that don't quite line up. And so, and one of them is Clovis. You know, the Clovis Point and all, I think that's 13,500. There are also folks, or evidence of people being down in South America 12,000 years ago, and that doesn't quite correspond. So there is another thought that at least either all of this route or some of this route, you could do that by boats. But again, that's something I know very little about, but we could have a talk about it someday. These are the Andes. So on the west side of the Andes, these are the civilizations that are there, and I'm not going through all of these. The point is they're chronological from the top down, and so the Inca, that was real bad. The Inca would be way down here at the bottom. Chimu were still way up in the northern part, up by Ecuador. The Wari are really the folks that the Inca probably settled out from. My point is just that all of these civilizations, whatever they developed in the area, slowly percolated up to the Inca, and then the Inca just perfected them. So a lot of things, for example, terrace farming, it isn't that the Inca invented it, it was invented somewhere, you know, way back in here. And then percolated up. Now, when you look at these, with the Archaeological Society here, you probably recognize all of these names. But at least maybe the Nazca. There's the thing of the Nazca lines. These are very, very interesting, but nevertheless, the Nazca are 100 to 800 Common Era, so way before the Inca. But these are these very, very large figures. This is down in the Coronado part of Peru, which means red. Not did I say Colorado? Colorado, with an A on the end, Colorado. But there's small red stones all over the floor there, and if you brush them aside, you have this much brighter, whiter land. So they brush them aside, they make these roadways, and this was, as far as I know, these were discovered from the air in like 1927, because to me, you can only really see them in the air, and I've never seen them. I've never been there. So this is just what I read, but they do say that if you're on hills around there, you can see them, but they're gigantic. They exist over kilometers. And then they're all different figures. The one that I showed there first is the condor, but you have monkeys, you have lizards, you have all these figures, gigantic, on the desert floor, so to speak. Now that was something, though, that didn't get passed on. In other words, the other cultures, the other civilizations there didn't pick up and keep doing that. It's only the Nazca, as far as we know, that did that. Has nothing to do, therefore, with the Inca. So I'm going to tell you now things that the Inca inherited from all of those groups. These are things that came up to them, and then they could deal with them. The first one is Quechua, and this is the language that they use. This is still spoken in Peru today, more in the rural areas, down around Lake Titicaca, down into Bolivia. So it's a language, but it was only spoken at the time of the Inca. They had no alphabet, they had no way to write it down, so there's no written records. And this will come in a lot in my talk, because there's a lot of conflicting reports, but that's because it all came down, wrong button, pardon me. It all came down verbally with nothing written. Now, a few weeks ago, Bill Melander gave a talk about Sanskrit, and it was a similar thing, that Sanskrit was only a verbal language, and it was only toward the end that it became written. And at that time, the discussion was that that could be very good because you really develop your verbal skills. You're able to memorize long passages, you memorize long stories, songs, poems. On the other hand, to me, it isn't such a great thing. I mean, you deal with what you have, but I, for one, cannot memorize 2 lines on this chart, so I don't think it would have worked for me. But I know there are people that, memorize the Bible, memorize all of Shakespeare, and so if you had those people with a verbal language, I think it could be accurate and pass properly, but otherwise I worry about it. And likewise, no written numbers. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4 written, yet they had a very good numerical system. It was based on the decimal system, units, tens, hundreds, and they use these quipus, and I'll talk about those in maybe 2 slides from now. But they had very, very accurate numerical records. They kept them in Cusco, but they knew the population, they knew the size of the army, they knew how much corn was in this storage house and how many potatoes here. They kept very, very detailed and careful numerical records by way of these quipus. Let's see, they had no iron. There's no iron anywhere on that side of South America. They had gold and silver, which are very valuable, but you can't use gold for a shovel. You can't chip rocks with gold. You need iron to have hammers and chisels. You have iron to have swords and many military weapons, and all they had was gold and silver. They did have copper as well. But these are things that this is the way things bubbled up to them. That's what they had to deal with. They had no, what I call, beast of burden. No elephants, no camels, no ox, no horse, nothing to really carry heavy loads, to pull a plow, to ride. They had llamas and alpacas, and I apologize to any llama packers here in the San Juans. I mean, they can carry light loads, but you can't ride them. You can't put them in a team to pull something heavy. And I see that as a difficulty, but they live with it, and therefore they just decided whatever it is, even if you have to move 100 yards of dirt, you do it in baskets by people carrying it. And they walk and run, so you need a good trail system, and they have a good trail system. They have no wheel. All of the Americas have no wheel, and this is something also that I always found surprising when I was young and you learned about inventions. I always thought the best invention that I'd like to have is a wheel, and get the patent on that. But then I said no, because everybody would have the wheel. It's so simple of a concept. And it is simple if you talk about a disc with a hole in it. You can make a necklace or beads. You can make toys for children. But if you really try to make a wheel that can carry a heavy load, it's very, very difficult if you've ever tried that. And it isn't the wheel, it's the axle in the wheel and the tolerances on that. If you go and try to make something like that in your garage, it'll wobble, fall apart. Soon you'll pick up the load and carry it yourself. They have a barter system. Everything was barter. You trade these potatoes for these carrots and just trade whatever. They had no money, so there wasn't a little bag of gold or something. You could, I'm sure, trade some piece of gold you had for some potatoes, but it was all barter. But one of the things that entered very strongly into the barter system was labor. So you could, for potatoes, you could give somebody 2 weeks of working in their farm or whatever. And even that's used in a way that today now in Peru, if somebody walked up and gave you a bag of potatoes, and if you took it, you're immediately obligated to give them some labor. You have to somehow give them back. And there's a thing where they go and they give people like what maybe is equivalent to a silver dollar. They just say, here, take this, and you take it, you're immediately obligated to do some labor for them. Oh yes, mummies. And remember, these are things even before the Inca. Last 2 weeks ago, I guess, Dennis Aronson gave a talk about after death, what then, I think. Well, but he didn't talk about mummies. So all of these people believe that there was a life after death, that you lose the energy out of your body, but you're going to get it back. But you are still, your body is still, can do a lot of things. So they knew how to embalm, just almost similar to what the Egyptians did, but where the Egyptians would then take the body and wrap it up and put it in maybe a wood casket, in a stone casket, bury it back inside the mountain and seal off the mountain. These people took the mummy and put it in a chair and often kept it at home. So, in the living room, whatever you might have, grandma and grandpa there. If you were royal, well, let me go through some of the things. I'm going to talk about mummies first. So I'm going to have several of these little pictures, and these are from the Chronicles. So these were little booklets written by a fellow, Ayala, sometime after the Inca. And this was a time when the Spanish in Peru especially were really being very hard and heavy on the Inca. So they would write these books in to improve the spirit of the local people. So he wrote this, and this is a cover, and what the covers look like to me is if you took children or grandchildren to Denny's and asked for crayons and a coloring sheet, you would get something like this. But here's what they do. They're usually sitting in a chair, wrapped in their best robes. The imperial mummies kept all their wealth and property and often stayed in the palace. They had servants to wave fans and keep flies off them. They were offered food and drink. Doubt they had much. They were consulted. So if you had your family, grandmother and grandfather in the back room, and if you had some problem, you would go and sit with them and consult with them and wait for an answer. The Incas were very big, all of these on festivals. They would have festivals that would run 2 to 3 weeks, and they would bring the mummies out. So this one picture there on the left, indeed, they may be heading to a festival or something. So you would have lots of mummies wandering around in addition to the folks drinking their chicha. And if they were a military mummy, you would often take them to battle. So they would, you would see the whole army pulling up with several of these mummies. So it's an interesting thing, but they were very important to the people. And now I'm jumping ahead to the Khipu. So the Khipu is this cord with lots of strings hanging down off of it. And what you do to put a number down on that is you tie knots in it. And the knots are not all simple knots. They're not just simple overhand or figure 8 knots. You can put several coils on it and tie a knot, and that means something. But it's all numerical, so to speak, but people are still studying Khipus because a lot of people feel there's extra information in there. There's this old joke that some of us old people talk about, how you keep telling the same joke over, and they're long jokes, and people laugh at them every time, but still they're tired of hearing the whole joke. So they said, well, let's just number the jokes. And then all we have to do is say the number, and indeed it works. You say number 23, everybody laughs. But so the question is, can you have numbers that mean other things? The 7 commandments, if I just put 7 down or 5, it has additional meaning. But at least they're numbers, and they had in Cusco, they had so many of these quipus. And like I said, they were about population. They were about what was in storehouses, how much land was in cultivation, and so on and so forth. And they had terraced agriculture. So if you have water coming down a river, and if you have land, but you need to irrigate it, you need to get the land very, very flat, and then you need to build a canal or channel to bring the water to that. So you make the land, if you have pretty flat land, you just make it very flat, but if it's on a hillside, You make it flat by building a wall on the downhill side and making these terraces. And this is Yatapata, this is a sacred valley in the Urubamba River going down here and the railroad. And this isn't the greatest picture maybe of terraces, but this is one I took as I'm starting to hike the Inca Trail, and you hike up and you look down on that. But I mean, it's not only that it's terraced, but it's aesthetically so pleasing the way they made it, and I think that's very, very nice. And the terraces today, I mean, not today, but at the end, they would take out all the dirt out of the terrace and put rocks in, and then put gravel in, and then put topsoil or dirt in, and then plant their crops. And this sounds just like what you do in your house with a house plant or something. I mean, and you think of moving that amount of dirt in and out of these terraces, it's amazing. And you don't have any wagons, you don't have any of that. So here's some people or some fellows with these shovels called chakitayes, and the women and the children are planting and breaking clods. They all work together, and they're making potatoes. Potatoes are a major thing in this area. I'll call it Peru. Of course, it wasn't Peru then, but they have hundreds of varieties. Well, 200 varieties is what they normally say of potatoes, of all different types. But for the vegetarians, they had all of these vegetables, and they're growing very, very well. An individual farmer can make more than enough for his family and the community, because this terracing system is so stable and so productive. So, yeah, we might come back to this. So now I'm ready to talk about the Inca, and typically the Inca starts with this fellow, Pachacuti. That very first picture I showed was one of these by Louis Glanzmann. He's a 20th century painter. That first picture I showed of Coronado. And this is another picture. So clearly he didn't paint a picture of Pachacuti. This is a Highlander from Peru, but he has the regalia on of the Inca. So this is when we start this, and these are his ancestors, if you like, and you notice it goes back to Manco Capac, this fellow that came out of Lake Titicaca. So this starts probably in mythology, although, you know, there may be some reality to some of these people, but then this is father and son all the way down. And then here I'm going to list a couple more, because Pachacuti, together with these other two, are really the ones that drove the expansion of the empire. And I want to make sure we understand what we mean by an empire and why that's different than a civilization. You have these people in their civilizations, but if they stay put, and if they just by assimilation maybe pick up neighbors or something, then that's just expanding their influence and the civilization. But if they really have the intent to go out and either let's say by force, bring people under their wing, then that's empire building. And that's really what Pachacuti decided to do. All of these other folks were happy just to be in the Cusco area and build up Cusco and the farming and gardening around there. Pachacuti, there's the folklore that he found a crystal map, whatever that is, of the area, and how that told him that he needed to go and expand. So based on that, he built up his armies. Typically when they would move with an army, we're talking at minimum 50,000 soldiers. So they're not small armies when they pull them together. Here's one more I put in here. The Chancas were neighbors that kept fighting with Cusco. And this is the type of thing that I get into when I read this. I don't know what to believe. You'll read one book and it'll say that it was Viracocha. I've confused you. Viracocha, remember, was a creating god, but somehow this Inca thought that he could pick up the name, so he's Inca Viracocha. And then Pachacuti is his son, but is not his oldest son, is not the one that should have been heir apparent to become the next Inca. And somehow the Chancas were attacking or ready to attack. And one book you'll read, it said that Puchacati is the one that got the home defense together and defended from the Chancas, and the other one will say Viracocha is the one that did it. And so I don't know how to sort between those. So that's the type of thing you get a lot, but that's because there was nothing written at that time. This is all what came down to the Spanish, and they interpreted it. It probably has a filter on it as it comes down. It's censored. If something is real bad in there, it probably gets dropped along the way, and all the glowing things come through. But anyway, I'm sorry. Okay, so here is the empire, and I know you probably can't read this, but this is Cusco here, and this area right around Cusco is where they expanded by the time the Puchacati came. Now, Puchacati came, and then he goes and he takes the armies and he conquers all of this land all the way up to present-day Ecuador, all the way up to 0 degrees latitude. And then, I need my glasses. Tupac Inca, the next one, went all the way south down to here. So in about 55 years, they'd gone from what was around Cusco to all of this land. And again, all of the numbers were there in Cusco. Whatever you wanted to know, they had the information in Cusco. So this, I'm going to tell you now how to be welcome to the Inca Empire. So Puchacati comes out with this army of 40,000 and comes up to your valley. Do you want to become a member of the Inca Empire, or do you want to fight? And not many people fought, so almost all of them went in right away. You had to do two things right away. You had to pledge your complete loyalty and allegiance to the Supa Inca. He was supreme. You would do anything for him. And you had to accept Inti, the sun god, as the number one god. You could go ahead and worship your other gods, but you had to say that Inti was number one. And I point those out because those will come back later in the story. Let's say you're a farmer, you have some terraces, you give 1/3 of your crop to Supa Inca, you give 1/3 of your crop to Inti, and you get to keep 1/3. And that's more than enough the way the production was on these terraces. So the Supa Inca share and the Inti share, they build separate warehouses or storage houses, and locally that would be kept. If there was ever a famine, people would get the goods out of there. When these big armies came, they ate out of the Inca and the Inti storehouse. I'll come back to that again in a minute. You have to pay taxes, but remember there's no money, so your taxes are this mita. Always the wrong button, but anyway. And mita means labor. So you agree that you'll put in 2 months, and they don't have maybe months, so maybe these are lunar cycles, and you'll work for the government. And it works like this, that the group here in Durango, that is time for them to do their mita, it comes out of Cusco, who's going to do what and where you're going to go, and maybe you're going to march off to Steamboat Springs, I don't know, to work on a road there. And lo and behold, here come all these folks from La Junta. You know they're from La Junta because the way their clothes are woven and all their distinctive things of what region they're from. Where are we? And the next thing you know, they're up on the front of Perrin's Peak, terracing it. But they're from La Junta, but this is their mita, and they've decided in Cusco that they're going to make this a large community farming area on the front of Perrin's Peak, so they're working away. Now, the reason they didn't let the Durango people do that is it's better to get them away from home so they really get to work. These La Junta people, they don't know anybody here, and they just work. But if you're in the Inca Empire, you really appreciate this. I mean, you see all of this happening, whether it's road building, terracing, whatever. This is all happening. It's infrastructure, and you'll have benefit from it. This says all citizens have the same rights, privilege, and advantage. Everybody is clothed and fed. All the land belongs to the Supa Inca. So if you thought you owned your plot before, you don't now. Again, it's all controlled out of Cusco, and the land is redistributed. So if you have an older couple, and they're trying to do 3 acres or something, and the husband dies, they know this in Cusco, and they probably give the widow a different plot of land, and some upcoming family gets this land, but they keep moving people around and redistributing the land. And then, of course, all gold and silver belong to the Supa Inca. There's one other thing that they want to tie you in to Cusco. They really want you to feel part of the empire. So usually if you were the leader, the mayor or whatever of this valley, your oldest son would go to Cusco, and he would become almost part of the royal family. I mean, clearly he would be part of the upper class in Cusco, and that's where he would have his family. And so now your son and his family are in Cusco. The other thing they would do is they would take, certainly from the mayor or whoever, they'd go in his house and they'd find his mummies, his mom and dad or grandmother and grandfather, and take those to Cusco. And they had this big temple to Inti, and they had a room in there, and they would put the mummies there. So now your family is over here, but your mummies, your mummy and your daddy, your mummies are in Cusco. And so if there's a big festival, you go up and pull them out and party with them. This is the road system. They had 25,000 miles of road, and they kept improving it with the Mita laborers. And they have these kaski, which are these runners. And they had fleets of runners, and each runner would run about 20 miles on a trail. There would be tombos, which are like rest houses every 20 miles, where there'd be a number of these. And your assigned route is this next 20 miles from here to Mangas. And so from the end of the, well, let me go to let me do, here's one more of these chronicles of this. The runners, this guy looks real tired as he comes across the bridge. Hopefully he's finished, but they have this conch, and they blow the conch. So remember, well, anyway, that's how you know that one is coming. So here's what they did: 25,000 miles. Your relay portion is 20 miles at a time. This is give or take. Now, it doesn't mean you only ran one of these a day. You might get to rest for a few hours, and then you would run another one back. You ran the same route all the time, so you could run it night or day, and the runners would be going night and day. Together, they would cover 200 miles in a day. They could get a message from south of Santiago, the south end of the empire, to Cusco within 5 days, and that's amazing at this time. The Pony Express didn't go this fast. Pony Express only lasted about a year. They're using horses. And I guess it's true, I don't know, but you see them just almost throw the saddlebag to the next one. Well, here, the fellow that's coming in, he blows his horn when he's at the distance that you can hear a horn. And the next runner goes out to meet him. And then they run together along the trail while the one is telling the other one all the verbal information that needs to be passed. And once that's done, the new one takes off and then goes on and on and on. They also carried presents, and for the Inca, they carried fresh seafood from the sea. So the night before, he could send a kaski down to the shore and maybe get a halibut for dinner the next night. Now, everybody didn't do this, but they were bringing fresh seafood into Costco. Now, this is what impresses me, and I think anyone who's been to Cusco is impressed by this. Tried to make stone walls in my life, some dry stack and some with mortar, and they're pretty awful. But then you see something like this, and you start to wonder how they did it. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I'm probably running a little behind. But how do you cut these stones like this? If you were a gravestone cutter or something with carbide saws and all, I don't think you could cut stone and fit it together like this. These stones are very, very heavy, and this type of fitting, you assume means you put the stone in and then you take it out and modify it. Well, some of these stones, this is just one that you find there off the square in Cusco, and it has 12 sides, so all the niches and 12 sides. They did, and you'll notice it kind of looks like orange peel, and that's because the way they shaped all these stones is by knocking them with another stone. And so that's where you get that effect, and you say, well, yeah, but how could you do an inside corner like that? You did the inside corner because you had kind of a shaped rock that you would skip on a lake or something. In other words, the flattest rock you could have and whack away in the inner corner. And there's a lot of people out there trying to figure out how they made these stones. This is Sacsayhuaman, this fort up above Cusco. But this stone here weighs about 70 tons. And again, they have grass ropes. By that I mean ropes that you make out of grass. This is the same thing they use for their suspension bridges. But it would take hundreds of people to drag that thing around and get it up into place. So to me, these are truly amazing. The stone they used was whatever was close. You don't want to get stone from a quarry far away. At Machu Picchu, the stone is granite. This is Sacsayhuaman here, and this is blue limestone. And then this is for the geologist, not dorolite is somehow the hardest stone they had. So that was what you would use for your knocking stone to take material off the other ones. This is the, in Cusco, it was called the Inti Concha, which means the temple to Inti, but now it's called the Cori Concha. Everything up to about this gray wall is Inca and original Inca. Yeah, let me finish and I'll go back. And this is all original Inca, except that the Spanish came in and of course they wanted to make this a church. So this colonial type front was added, and of course the church domes. And then also all these windows with the arches. The Incas didn't do arches. That's just something that didn't occur to them, or I don't know what, but everything has lintels on it. But anyway, they built this church on top of this. But originally you imagine that this was the Inti Concha. It was all plated with gold. So the State House, or whatever it is, the Capitol up in Denver, they use gold flake and they paint, or they do that little dome in gold. This entire building was in gold. And the inside, this is just a computer rendition of what it looked like, but that's when you put gold flake all over that. So that was gold. There were, in this garden area down here, there were life-size gold statues. So there was a lot of gold there. And this would have been, well, the Spanish haven't quite shown up, but they're ready to come. And then that word would have gotten back to Coronado and such. So this is why it isn't outlandish that they thought there would be other cities of gold like this, because there was just unbelievable gold wealth in Cusco. And then this is another one of these Glansman drawings. I just like it. You can see it's the center leaf of a book. But this is Haina Capac, the third of those. And I don't know if he's going up to Ecuador, but he spent a lot of time up around Quito. And a matter of fact, it's imagined that he was fancying moving Cusco up to Quito. He liked the climate there better, supposedly. But this is kind of what it looks like if you had 80,000 soldiers. There's some llamas here carrying light loads. Here's maybe the Inca, and maybe this is a mummy, I don't know. But you can see the trail of people, and then you can see the trail going on up probably over a pass or something. But it's amazing, and they're not carrying food with them. They know when they show up down the road, there will be a storehouse. Cusco has told them how much food they can take out of that. They've got the quipus to count it out. So that's, now I'm imagining that Pachacuti is gone, Tupac Inca is gone, and this is this guy, Haina Capac, who's up in the Ecuador region now. He has a son that I don't show here, who was the heir apparent to become the next Inca. I show two other sons here, and I show that he took over in, jumping ahead, he took over in 1493, and he died in 1527. So now we go to the final chapter in this. But remember that, because we're going to come back, and we're going to come back to Huascar and Atahualpa. So this now is a map of the Western Hemisphere. It shows where different countries colonized. So this is from later. This isn't at this time. But it shows you what Spain had right to, all of this area. It shows you what the Portuguese, the Pope divided the New World between the Portuguese and the Spanish, but later the British will come and they'll take the western or eastern coast of the United States and Canada and the French in the middle. But that's not the point. The point is just that this is where the Spain ends up. So here comes somebody, Columbus. I didn't put his first name down. I trust you have that memorized. He shows up in the Bahamas in 1492, returns to Spain, to Seville, and he tells them, yes, there's new land out there, and these people are just going crazy trying to get boats together and to ship out. And I'm just going to show some of them. So here comes Balboa in 1513. Well, that's 21 years later. And he comes and he goes to Panama. And I think I don't quite have the arrow going to Panama, but maybe he made a turn at the end. And anyway, he got to Panama. And one of the people he had on the ship with him was a young bastard. And I don't mean that as a derogatory term. That's the way you'll read it in the book. And illiterate. And his name was Pizarro. And he's just on the ship with him as one of the young soldiers. They go to I'm sorry. We'll deal with Cortez in a minute. They go here and they go inland looking for gold, always looking for gold. But they didn't go very far before all of a sudden out ahead of them from this hilltop they see another ocean. So that's when they discovered the Pacific Ocean, and they decided that this place in Panama was a good place to have a Spanish enclave. And so for a long time there was a viceroy there, lots of folks were there. And then I've already got Cortez on here. He shows up 6 years later and he goes to Mexico, goes inland and meets some Aztec folks who take him to Mexico City to meet Montezuma. He either kidnaps or arrests or whatever Montezuma, and pretty soon that's the end of the Aztec. And that's not what this talk is about, and I'm running out of time. So quickly, Pizarro's got to show up. There's Pizarro. And he stays in Panama, and he makes 3 trips down here to Peru. The first one, he just got turned back. He didn't have enough supplies. The second one, he comes down, he goes to Tumbes, and it's a city, it's an Inca city. There's a lot of gold there. He gets a little bit of their gold and goes back to try to really put together a big expedition to go down to the Inca territory. But when he gets back, the viceroy of Panama said, no, we're going to give that to somebody else to do that. So quickly, Pizarro goes all the way back to Spain, talks to Queen Isabel, not the same one that Columbus dealt with. This is her granddaughter, and shows her, I've got gold, I've got, this is going to be great. And she funds him for another trip to go back and says that any land he finds, he can be the governor of. So he quickly gets back and pushes the right button and puts together another trip, and in 1531, he gets down here. Now, all the way back to 1513, though, when the first Spanish, Balboa, got there, off of the ship, they started to release diseases, primarily smallpox and influenza. Where do we go now? Yeah, you. And so those diseases are released up here, and they quite quickly find their way down into Ecuador. And remember, that's where Huayna Capac and his heir apparent son are. They both die quite quickly, or at least in 1527, of smallpox. So now he's dead, the heir apparent is gone, and we have Huáscar and Atahualpa. So these are two sons, but they're not meant to be Inca. And so they decide they'll have a civil war. Huáscar goes back to Cusco. They both have their armies, and they are fighting it out up and down the Inca Empire. So we've got at least two bad things going for the Inca now. We have disease going rampant in the country, and we have a gigantic civil war going on between these two. You know, this is almost something that you would make a movie of, but I don't know if you could keep track of who all the players are. I apologize, this isn't the greatest map in the world, but Pizarro comes here to Tumbes, and he's going to work his way down to Cusco. And he's amazed when he gets to Tumbes because the city is ruined. It's just rubble because of the Civil War. Remember, he was here just, 5 years ago or something, and now it's just ruined, but supposedly Cusco is intact, so he'll head to Cusco. And Atahualpa is still up in Ecuador, but he's had his colleagues down in Cusco arrest his brother Huáscar, so his brother Huáscar is in irons down in Cusco. So he's going to go back and declare himself Inca. But remember, these Kaski, these runners are going everywhere, bringing news, and so he immediately has news that these Spanish have arrived in Tumbes and are moving toward Cajamarca, so he decides to detour and go there. He's heard of the horses. He doesn't have any, but he has these visions of raising horses and having horses for his army. He has visions of doing horrible things to the Spanish. And so he goes to meet him, and he's got 7,000 people, soldiers in arms, and Pizarro has 170. So this is what's called the Battle of Cajamarca. 168 Spanish soldiers with a couple cannons and a few horses, 7,000 Incas, and they go down there, and on November 15th, they meet in this courtyard. And this friar, I don't know what type of priest he is, and I don't know if you read this, but he comes out with his scroll, and this is what Atahualpa has to agree to, that he will pledge his loyalty and total allegiance to, not Inca, not him, as he was making everyone else agree, but to Charles V, the King of Spain, and that you will accept not Inti anymore as the God above all others, but either, I don't know if it was Jesus Christ or the Trinity. So he sees these same two conditions that he was putting on everyone, and he's not going to sign this. They bring a Bible out and give him the Bible to swear on, and he just throws the Bible to the ground. You know, a lot of this was made up, but now you really have Spanish people who are writing this down. So now this maybe gets a little bit accurate, maybe not the way I tell it, but at least there might be some accuracy. So he throws it down. This is the time also of the Spanish Inquisition, so something like cursing or whatever he did and throwing the Bible down, this is heresy. So immediately the Spanish come out, fire the cannons, scare off the few around Atahualpa, and they capture him. So now he's captured and put into the backroom dungeon or whatever. And immediately he orders his troops outside the city to stand down, not to attack, because he was in dire straits. And so he deals with Pizarro, and he said that he'll pay a ransom to be free. And the ransom, the room, which was supposedly 15 by 24 feet by 8 feet tall, would be filled with gold once, and that same size room filled with silver twice, and that would be the ransom. And Pizarro thought that was a good deal. So Atahualpa puts out the word for people to start bringing gold to Cajamarca. And they're bringing the gold in, and what do they do with the gold? This is a picture of Inca type gold. You wonder why isn't the Prado Museum in Madrid and Lima Museum and all of them full of this type of gold work. And this is not really from this, in other words, not found during this big ransom. This is all found in burials of people, but it's the type of gold they have at this time. So this is being flooded into these rooms, filling the rooms with this and with silver. But what do the Spanish do with it? Well, they put it in a cauldron, they melt it down, and they make gold coin. And they put the gold coin in casks or in chests and get them off to the ships in Panama and get them back to Spain. And gold is flowing into Spain, also, mind you, from the Aztecs up in Mexico, but also everything they can pull out of the Inca Empire. So now I'll move to, okay, let me just finish that story. So Atahualpa is in prison in Cajamarca, but he's in touch with his people outside, and he understands that Huascar down in irons down in Cusco is talking to the Spanish. So he's assuming that what he's doing is arranging for a higher amount of gold that he will pay to let him free and take care of Atahualpa. So he orders his men to kill Huascar. Now this word gets back to Cajamarca, and so Pizarro accuses him of murdering his brother and sentences him to death by burning. And I should have said back when we were talking about mummies, the one type of death you don't want is burning, because if you burn the corpse, you're never going to get the life energy back into it. So he's going to burn him at the stake. And so Atahualpa quickly agrees to become baptized Catholic. And by doing that, then he only gets to be garroted. So he's garroted, but nevertheless, he's put to death. So now you have both of those brothers gone. Back in Cusco, you have, this is going to be a line of people, and I'm not going to probably take the time to go through all of this, but this one didn't last long. He was poisoned almost immediately. Manco Inca, I mean, what Pizarro wants to do is come now and take one of these brothers and make him the Inca, and then the people will think that it isn't the Spanish trying to take over or something. They're installed as a puppet Inca, but it'll be fine. Manco Inca is only 20 years old, but he plays the game for a while, but pretty soon he just can't stand the way the Spanish are knocking him down. So he escapes from Cusco, and immediately an army forms around him. He now has a rebel army, and this is where I'm really speeding up to get through this. He has a rebel army, and these are now the additional puppets that Pizarro puts in. But Manco Inca and then these other ones here go and have kind of a remote rebel army for a while. And this is a map. I don't know how well you can see this. This is north is up. Here is Cusco down here. Here is the Sacred Valley with the Urubamba River. Here is Machu Picchu. We haven't really talked much about Machu Picchu, but he takes his army and then his sons, and they have the army, and they're here in Espiritu Pampa, but that back then was called Vilcabamba. And that's where they were for quite a while. And finally, the last one, the youngest one, and they just keep fighting. Guerrilla warfare, killing the Spanish on their route from Lima, not called Lima then, but that was Pizarro's new city he was trying to set up on the coast. And the Spanish are moving between Lima and Cusco, and they're attacking them. But finally, the last one is Tupac Amora, and I think I have one more. Here is Tupac. He's finally captured by the Spanish. He's marched into Cusco, and he's beheaded. So that's the end of all the Incas there, and it's interesting that they show him as being so short compared to the Spanish. I don't know that he was. So now that is kind of the end of my talk. I haven't talked about Hiram Bingham. I haven't talked about Machu Picchu. I haven't talked about what's going on in modern, or even the 19th century in Spain. But the Incas, the Spanish just stayed in control, and really, they were really a very heavy weight on the locals. And now I'm going to talk about the Inca Trail. And I don't know if this is a good point, if you want to take a stretch, if people, I'm only going to spend about 5 minutes on the Inca Trail, and then I'm going to have questions, or do you want to have a few questions right now about what I talked about? And let me tell you one other thing if you want to know more. There is an anthropology department at the college, and Kathy Deere Fine is a professor in anthropology, and in the spring she's teaching a course called Legacy of the Inca. It's a different Inca, it's I-N-K-A, so I don't know. No, it's the same. And do all of you know now about this thing called community learners? You know that program that the college has now? You can find it on the president's page, but this is a way for people who are not members of the college to, let me call it, audit classes. Now, you can't audit all classes, but some of them you can, and it's something that you might avail yourself of. And if you want to learn more about the Incas, clearly taking a class like that would be very good. So, any questions just on what I've, and if there's any Quechua speakers in here, I apologize for my accent on some of those words. Some of them are real tongue twisters, I think. Anybody want to run, or you want to hear 5 minutes of Inca Trail? Oh, all right. So I came back to Colorado in 1972, and I had friends who had a lot more time and money than I did, and they were off on treks and whatever, trekking in Nepal, treks in New Zealand. But the one that always interests me most is the ones that would go down and do the Inca Trail, go down and trek in Peru. And in part because of the stones, but at that time you just went down, there was no permit. You just put your backpack on and got off at kilometer point 82 and started hiking the trail. And there were very few people. When you got to Machu Picchu, you went and slept, put out your bag and tent right down in the open area in Machu Picchu. And they said there weren't very, very many people, but it just became overcrowded, like everything. Everything we love it to death. And so finally, I guess two things happened. The Peruvian government shut that all down and said, now you will only do it on organized tours that are portered and put together by Peruvian people. And then, of course, the other thing, that Shining Light, is that what it was called? The guerrilla group. I mean, they're blowing bombs off, and so it wasn't the greatest idea in the world, maybe, to go to Peru at that time. But now that's all gone away, and it's really lovely. It will cost you, because now you must go with one of these, what do I want to call it, a catered group, a guided tour. But nevertheless, that's what I did. But they pay a lot for your permit. You cannot, as far as I know, you can't buy a permit. They buy your permit. But part of that goes to people cleaning the trail. It's one of the cleanest trails I've hiked. So anyway, let me just tell you, this you can't read, but this is a sign that you may see as you start the trail, and it talks about the trail. This is where you're starting, and you're going up. This is not a peak. This is the highest pass. This is Dead Woman Pass, and down and up another pass, and down, and finally you come to the Sun Gate, where you're looking down at Machu Picchu. So this is then, in that other map I had, this is the same orientation. So here's the Sacred Valley, the Urubamba River, and the railroad. Cusco is back over here someplace, and Ollantaytambo is here. And they get you up here to milepost 82, and this is where you hike. You'll see 3 tents here. Here's 1, 2, and 3, and those are your 3 nights on the trail. This is Yactapata, that terraced place that I showed. This is where I took the picture of that and hike on. And I'm not going to bore you with lots of pictures, but I couldn't find any models for this, so this is the best I do. This is the start of the trail. This is the first day. I mean, this isn't the end of it, but you're hiking up this valley. And, you know, it looks a lot like western Colorado or over in Utah or something. It's really a lovely hike. And then this is me on the top of Dead Woman's Pass. So that other picture was maybe taken back down this valley or something. It's a pass. It's not like the top of a 14er. It's about 14,000 feet. But as a pass, the wind is just blowing through. It's just, it's amazing. So I'm trying to hold it together there. And then you do a lot of this on the second day. Those first days, a lot of it is rocks that you're walking on. And I must say, in the 3 days I walked, a rock never moved under my foot. So they're all set. Now, they're not Inca rocks. They continually are modifying and keeping the trail up, but it's very well made. I don't like rocks. I would rather an engineer pass trail where it's dirt and you just kind of go along at your own pace. Rocks, you know, sometimes they're 18-inch steps, and sometimes they're 4-inch steps, and they're up and down, and they're killing you whether you're going up or down. On the other hand, they're all weather. When I talk about engineer going up into Engineer Pass or something, if it was raining or something and you were in mud, it wouldn't be so fun, but this is much better. Now, on the other hand, I think this probably is Inca. You come in up here, and it's like going down through a cave, but you know, these steps have been cut out. You can see they look a little treacherous because if there was water running down them and if you didn't have the right soles on your boot, I think you could fall. And then this is another one. This is really coming, you're really more in jungles now, as you can see by the ferns, but you're coming down this set of stairs. I don't know, somehow I'm impressed with stairs, I guess. This is something that's called the monkey steps. It's a very, very steep, and it's maybe 80 feet up. And it's just interesting because the guides have told you that when you get to that, immediately go on all fours and climb up it with your hands and your feet. And like this fellow's doing. But as soon as I got there, it seemed to me I was much more comfortable just to stand up and walk up it. So that's what I did. And then finally, this is not the Sun Gate. The Sun Gate is further up, and you don't get as nice a picture as close-up of Machu Picchu. So this is much closer down, but this is Machu Picchu, and Huayna Picchu is this peak. You can also get a permit when you get your permit to be guided to go up Huayna Picchu, and I understand there's a lot of exposure on that. I didn't do it. I mean, this is 2 weeks before I'm going. I don't know if I'm going to make it to Machu Picchu. Why would I sign up for more? So that's all I was going to talk about. Again, I'm glad to stay and answer questions. These are some of my, references. This first one here, Garcilaso de la Vega was really a Inca. His mother was an Incan and his dad was a Spanish soldier, and he wrote this back in that time, back in the middle of the 16th century. But it's a lot of detail, like, what did they put on the table, and but it's all there. It's really complete. And then this fellow, William Prescott, he was a person in the middle of the 19th century. He wrote The Conquest of Peru, the history of that, the history of the conquest of, I think it's the Aztec, I don't think it's Peru. But anyway, those are very detailed. The third one is the National Geographic, and that's where I got those pictures of the painting by Glanzman. This is a book I highly recommend. I don't know how many of you have read it. I put off reading it a long time. It's called Turn Right at Machu Picchu, and it's by Mark Adams. It's a new book, and it came out, and something about the title, it just didn't sound right to me, but then it immediately went to the top of the New York Times list. It's very, very well written. It's an enjoyable book, but it's a fellow now that takes off and goes to Peru. What he's trying to do is follow Hiram Bingham's tours around and looking for Machu Picchu and looking for whatever, and all the intrigue going on back at Yale and between Yale and Peru. So all that's in there. But then plus, whenever they get to a certain place, they go back and talk about the Inca history. So you're getting all three stories woven together, and it's very easy read, and I just highly recommend it. It goes very fast. So now questions.